Thank you everyone for joining us today for our conversation from surviving to thriving, how to reshape company culture. A few housekeeping items before we begin. All lines are on mute and will remain on mute for the duration. We have saved time to answer questions, so please, as we're having our conversation, we love participation. Please drop those questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And yes, this session is being recorded. We will send out a replay and any slides we use after the session has concluded. So without further ado, let me hand it over to my colleague, Kristen, to get us started.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kate, and welcome everyone. We're excited to have you with us today. We are absolutely continuing to see an increasing trend in organizations focusing on their culture, and it's now more than ever. And all of you are obviously interested in the conversation as we have people joining us from all over the world today, including our guests. And our session today is the final of 3 sessions that we've been hosting as a part of a series on the topic of organizational culture. So we're excited you're with us. And let me start by introducing myself. So I'm Kristen Leverone, and I lead LHH's leadership development business globally. I've had a long career partnering with organizations to address their talent and leadership challenges. And I have been a part of LHH's own business transformation over the last 20 plus years. And with me today, we have 3 terrific guests who will share their perspectives and insights with us on the topic of culture. So let me start by introducing our first guest, Dr. Nancy Nazer. She has a career spanning over 20 years and is known for transforming HR functions and leaders into strategic consultants that help organizations meaningfully adapt to shifting business and talent landscapes. She believes workplaces and the people in them thrive when all employees are empowered to make an impact. She builds people-first, purpose-driven cultures. Nancy leads HR for OMERS, one of Canada's largest pension plans, serving over 600,000 members. She's also a proud member of OMERS' executive leadership team, an executive advisor for its Purpose at Work committee, and she co-chairs the Global I&D Council with OMERS CEO, Blake Hutchinson. Nancy is also a certified coach and mentor. She's passionate about finding ways to accelerate the readiness of women to take on bigger and more complex roles. And above all, she's committed to using her access and influence to advance inclusion, diversity, and belonging in the workplace. Welcome, Nancy.
Thank you. Delighted to be with everyone, and nice to see you and everyone else in our audience.
Terrific. Let's go to our second guest, Ralph Buchenschusch. Ralph is the employee experience lead at Microsoft, based in Switzerland. Prior to this position, he was the global head of organizational design, people analytics, and digitalization at Zurich Insurance. He also held other HR management positions during his time there. Before joining Zurich Insurance, Ralph worked as global people analytics manager for Nestle, as well as in different positions related to HR strategy, people analytics, and planning for the Telefonica O2 Group. He holds a bachelor's degree in business administration and MBA in general management from the IE Business School, and is currently working on his PhD at the University of Mannheim. Welcome, Ralph.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, and our third guest is Ali Sparks. So with over 2 decades of extensive experience in human resources, Ali currently serves as the global head of HR for LHH and Group SVP at the Adecco Group. Leading a global HR team, she has driven significant organizational transformations, enhanced employee engagement, and championed diversity and inclusion across multiple cultures and countries. Her career spans prominent roles at Zurich Insurance Group, British American Tobacco, Deloitte, and PwC, where she spearheaded talent acquisition, development, and management initiatives. Notable achievements include the successful integration of large-scale acquisitions, implementation of cutting-edge talent management systems, and the design of award-winning employee engagement programs. Balancing her professional commitments with a fulfilling personal life, Allie is a dedicated mother of 4, and this year celebrates her 30th wedding anniversary. Congrats, Allie, and welcome. Do we have Allie?
She,
Hi.
Okay, so Allie is having some technical issues, so she will be back. All right, so before we dive into the conversation with our guest today, I do want to first just level set us around, the definition of corporate culture. So we define corporate culture as the shared values, attitudes, standards, and beliefs that characterize members of an organization and define its nature. We also believe that culture is a key competitive advantage for organizations today. In our first session in our series, we were joined by Gaëlle de la Fosse, who is the president of LHH, and she shared the following perspective on culture. So I quote, "As we approach a talent shortage, senior leaders should be proactive in setting themselves up for success by implementing a talent strategy that prioritizes employee satisfaction and retention. Culture plays an important role in driving retention and can be a key competitive advantage in times of talent scarcity." And lastly, in our own LHH Workforce Trends Survey, we asked employees and employers 2 key questions as it relates to corporate culture. The first question was, outside of compensation, what, if anything, makes people want to work at an organization? And the number 1 answer for both employers and employees was a good workplace culture. The second key question was, what should your company increase its investment in to better attract and or retain talent? And the number 1 answer was a good workplace culture. And so we know that a positive culture is the anchor that keeps a team grounded and empowered, especially during periods of transition. It can foster collaboration, inspire problem solving, and can motivate everyone to move a company forward together. As we'll hear from our guests today, organizations across the globe are experiencing a whirlwind of change, from reorganization to mergers and leadership transitions. A company's resilience really hinges on one crucial element, its culture. So with that, we're going to get started with our conversation with our panelists. And I think we're going to stick to Nancy and Ralph. Oh, I think Allie might be back. Are you back?
Sort of here. Doing our best.
Okay, you're doing great.
Never fails. Never fails.
Don't worry. You've got some great colleagues here who are going to carry the weight if we need to. So let's start with the first question, which is really setting the context, right? So as we get into the conversation around culture and the way that each of you, what your insights and learnings are. Nancy, I'll start with you. If you could share sort of, what's happening in your organization or has happened that has made culture such a priority.
Thank you so much, Kristen. And I think it is such a important topic to discuss. For us at OMERS, again, as you pointed out, we are a defined pension plan. So we provide pension to over 600,000 pensioners members in Ontario. They're municipal workers. So when you think about that and the purpose that we have as employees, it is pretty empowering. I've worked in many different organizations, and often, you get set aside and you bring a marketing team to figure out what your purpose is. And for us at OMERS, it's very real. We're providing pension and we're touching the lives of people through that. So ultimately, when it comes to our people, we are, our objective and our purpose is to make the pension promise possible. So that unifies us, and we are a global organization. So when it comes to culture, it's really important to understand that there's a lot of diversity at OMERS in terms of the regions that we represent. So what we've done in terms of the transformation and in terms of understanding what we want in the how of our people, because we know our people are going to differentiate us, it is having one set of values. So we often say it's okay in terms of how you achieve those values, but we need to all live these values. And once I heard someone say that culture is what happens, what you see in an organization when nobody is watching. Culture is not a program. It's not, a wallet card or something that you put on your computer. It's what's lived every single day. And so I strongly believe that to create a great culture, there's a lot that you need to do, but it has to really reside and live in the essence of the organizations, and that's through its people. So when people complain about culture and point the finger at various ways, they're really complaining about themselves, because we have to recognize that we make up the culture. So understanding that notion, and for us at OMERS, having one set of values across all of the global regions we operate in, it allows for diversity, it allows for inclusivity, but it also helps us embed those values in everything we do. So 3 things that we've learned is ensuring that, again, you have clarity in terms of what your values are that align to your purpose. And secondly is ensuring those values live in everything you do, from hire to retire. It could be in your recruiting practices, onboarding. We have recognition programs that drive that, even behaviorally anchoring that in some cases, like 360s, talent, performance. Then you have clarity. And then finally, it's just ensuring that it's embedded in the fabric of the organization. And that's a little bit harder because it's not a checkbox, but making sure people, not just your leaders, but turning that, your employees, everybody has an understanding of what that is, and creating stories and experiences that people can share about those values. And in that, then, we'll talk more about it, but then ensuring that you have ways of measuring that and understanding when you can be successful and having the impact and when you're not, because it becomes very real and tangible and not something that people go, culture, what does this mean? It seems so grand. So those are some of the things that we've experienced in our efforts to really focus on embedding, and setting what they are, to establishing them in everything we do, and then finally having them lived and measured.
I love that, Nancy. There's a lot to it, and we're going to unpack some of that as we get going. You touched on the importance of really clarifying the values, embedding those values. So we'll have a chance to hear from each of you on that. You mentioned measurement. We're going to talk about measurement. But I love the culture is what happens when no one's watching. I've heard that saying before too. So lots of meaty stuff there that we can learn more about. But Ralph, I'd like to go to you and sort of pose the same question. Can you set some context or what's going on? What makes culture such a priority?
So in our case, it was actually, let's say, the change of our CEO. So in the end, when we got a new CEO, in the end, the whole culture got, let's say, reset. And how we, let's say, define culture is through, let's say, several key attributes that are in the end also essential to actually achieve our mission, which is empowering every person on the planet and every organization to actually achieve more. And there are, let's say, 4, let's say, key pillars where in the end our culture is grounded or actually built on, which is growth mindset, customer obsession, diversity and inclusion, and let's say being one Microsoft. And these cultural attributes are important because they help us to stay innovative, especially, let's say, in an industry where technology is changing very fast. Also, let's say, being responsible to customer needs, and in the end, let's say, being inclusive. And by fostering, especially, let's say, a growth mindset, we encourage actually, let's say, employees as part of the culture to continuously, let's say, improve and adapt, let's say, to the constantly ongoing changes. And adding to that, let's say, customer obsession actually ensures that, let's say, our products, our services are constantly also, let's say, aligned to the needs and, let's say, what actually, let's say, our customers also want. And I think a very important perspective then adding to that is what I mentioned, diversity and inclusion, because in the end, D&I in the end leads, let's say, to a broader range of ideas, different perspectives, and it's in the end enhancing creativity and problem solving, which is in the end a very important capability of an organization. And culture can really, let's say, bring that to life. And then in the end, the last element is being, let's say, one Microsoft. And that approach actually promotes in the end collaboration, teamwork, and making it in the end easier for the organization to achieve in the end the goals. And our CEO actually, let's say, is transforming in the end this culture since he, let's say, took over. And that happened actually almost 10 years ago. So as said, and also as Nancy said, culture is not a program, and culture you don't change overnight. So it's really, let's say, a very complicated process, and it really takes time to transform and shape in the end the culture you want to have. And we saw that it took and is taking, let's say, quite a long time. So when I joined actually Microsoft, it was the 8th year of this cultural transformation, and people said, no, we are still transforming. I said, well, that is actually really interesting, but you really see that it's really taking very serious from the senior leadership to really transform the culture. And we are seeing, let's say, also, let's say, the first benefits of it, because, for example, with generative AI coming, let's say, into the workplace, which is really transformative, you can really actually build on, let's say, different elements of your culture to bring in the end these new technologies quite quickly into, let's say, your ways of working. And culture is in the end, let's say, the glue or the key enabler to actually make that happen.
Okay, and again, lots of really great insights there. I mean, to me, I think what I would pull out for the audience to just reflect on a little bit more, as you talked about being on this kind of 10-year journey, right? So it's not a project, it's not a 1-year proposition, and you talked about that the culture became a key priority with the new CEO, and so I was thinking, you made me pause, like, well, wait, when was that? That was quite a while ago. So I think that's a really important insight for all of us to keep in mind as we embark on the process of helping to transform an organization's culture. Thank you, Ralph. And to my friend Allie, same question. I mean, I kind of know some of the answers to this because you and I have lived through a lot of these changes together. But in your role, it would be great to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah. And it is funny telling you the answers to this because you lived it and breathed it for quite some time. So to set the context a bit, our culture journey, as you know, was really, really complex. The LHH, we sit within the Adecco group. And when this all started, both were going through a huge transformation. So the Adecco group was moving from a decentralized, country-driven organization to 3 global business units, and LHH obviously being one of them. But within LHH, we had the most significant change because we were a multitude of different brands, products, and businesses, and we were pulling it all together under one umbrella. So not only was this a new brand, but we had a new strategy, we had a new org model, we had new ways of working, and we had a new go-to-market approach. So for top of mind for us in LHH, it was how do we create now this, as we called it, one LHH. So it wasn't just how we structure our business, but how do we work together in these new teams? So what's the vibe? What do we expect from one another? How do we build trust and relationships? And each part of our business that we brought under LHH was very, very distinct. But it was, as you know, Kristen, it was really important for us to start to create a culture that all of us could be collectively proud of, that we would recognize as our own when we show up to work every day. And our top priority was it was really about how do we build this together. So at the same time, the group, so the Adecco group, they were embarking on work around culture and values as well for many of the same reasons. So this really led to a bit of a debate internally around culture. Who owns the culture, particularly when you're in a big group with multiple brands and multiple businesses? So there was a bit of friction in the organization when we were having this conversation, but ultimately, the question was, does the group drive culture that is homogeneous? And where we landed on was that actually, because our businesses are distinct, there is a little something different in each of the businesses and how you live every day. So we ultimately landed on the fact that the group is who sets the values. So what are the rules of engagement that all of us, there's no questions asked. This is what you're signing up for. And the key elements then that were up to the GBU was that the culture and how you experience your day-to-day is going to be a little bit different. So we've kind of used a bit of a family analogy that, like you mentioned, Kristen, I have 4 children, but we as a family, there are certain things that when you are part of this family, we all agree to, or at least mom and dad set the tone for what we agree to. But each of the children they have their own personality, and they need to live up to those personalities, but it all works together. So I think for us, in LHH and the Adecco group, what was interesting about this is that it wasn't just the LHH culture, but it's how do we as an organization fit into the wider group. Hopefully that resonates, Kristen.
It does, and I've heard you share, yeah, and I've heard you, Ali, share that analogy before, and I think it can simplify something that can seem overly complex, right? So you have, this large global organization with 3 large distinct business units, and then, how do you address culture? So I think that's a great analogy, and it simplifies it. I also, as I think and reflect back on the three answers here and the discussion around it, sort of like what drives culture change, what makes it a priority. And we've heard just here, right? So it's like the mission of the organization, it's a new CEO, it's a new organizational structure, which then drove new leadership. So you can see there are a number of triggers that really have organizations kind of pause and reflect and think, how do we continue to transform the organization? And Ralph, we heard you talk about and making the impact on the business results and really connecting that. So Ralph, I want to move to you now with this question around measurement. So Nancy kind of preempted us a little, which was great. And so I'm just wondering, obviously in your role and being at Microsoft, how does data come into play? How do you use data in the work that you do around culture at Microsoft?
So using data is in the end, let's say, a crucial element. And we measure in the end throughout the year through active employee listening twice a year at global scale. Yes, what employees feel, what they need. And we use in the end, let's say, Viva Glint as a technology to really capture not only, let's say, scaled questions where you say, yes, I agree or I don't agree. We also, let's say, encourage, let's say, through in the end, the technological possibilities to also provide a lot of qualitative feedback in terms of text. And I actually want to emphasize that element because in a previous life, it was actually, let's say, quite similar. We also encouraged actually employees to share how do they actually, let's say, embrace, for example, certain things, how do they live the culture. They provided a lot of feedback. We collected a lot of insights, and we analyzed quite for a long time a quite rich data set. And when it comes to measurement and generating these rich insights, in the end, expectations from employees in many cases are to get something quite quickly back because you share your feedback and you're contributing, let's say, to the measurement, and you're expecting to get, let's say, an immediate response. And historically, that took always quite a long time. And what we see now also, let's say, with new advancements in technology is that we can actually go back to employees much faster, especially, let's say, on these qualitative aspect, which is telling you so much about, for example, your culture. And for example, recently we were running that survey, and for one area, actually, one of the business leaders actually opened his results, shared it with his teams, and actually used generative AI to actually say, hey, look, let's have a conversation around the collaboration culture or the team culture. And actually going live through the comments and through, let's say, the feedback he got to actually turn in the end all these insights quite quickly, let's say, into meaningful action plans, to actually keep transforming the culture, keep transforming, let's say, how we work. And I think that is a very important aspect to say, if we measure it, how can we actually turn these insights very quickly into concrete action so that people feel listened and that they feel that we hear them and we actually do also something about it. Because if not, in the end, the measurement will become, let's say, less effective because people will say, look, I have to wait too long to actually get something back. And that was, let's say one of the learnings where we actually saw we have to use, let's say, technology and these feedback mechanisms to actually listen to our employees, but also, let's say, go very fast back to certain areas where we actually want to improve things to constantly, let's say, evolve our culture.
Yeah, and obviously I've been in this field for many years, and that was always the risk. If you're going to launch surveys and ask for feedback, you need to be prepared to respond to that. But I love that you've been able to find ways to leverage technology to help you move more quickly, to letting people know that you heard them, and then you're taking action on their feedback. So that's terrific. Thanks, Ralph. Allie, I'm going to throw this one to you as well. So how does measurement and data come into play with the work that you're leading around culture?
Yeah, so I think kind of looking at it at the start of the journey and then post rollout. Before our transformation, we have historically used Peakon as our engagement tool throughout the Adecco group. And it measures just that. It measures engagement. So the drivers that either promote or detract someone from being engaged. And we had hoped in the beginning that that would be our starting point, but we realized that to do proper culture work, you really do need a culture tool. Now, I was very fortunate in this that I do happen to work for an organization that does this for our clients. This is not intended to be an advertisement, but it was wonderful to have a team just at my fingertips who could help us do this work internally. So we used the Barrett Culture Survey, and that's what we used at the start, as well as we conducted focus groups and interviews that we did in a very systematic way so that we could measure all of the input from those findings. And that's what really shaped ultimately what became our culture commitments. Post rollout then, and I know we'll talk about activation in a minute, but post rollout, at that point, we were actually able to work with Peakon to add specific questions to our culture that were specific to our culture commitment to the engagement survey. And as well, we were able to map existing questions to our culture attributes. So this survey goes out to all colleagues. So we were able to clearly measure by culture commitment where people sit in regards to that. So it really has helped over the last 2 years, or now almost 2 years since we've rolled it out. But it's helped to then focus on where we need to focus on the different parts of the culture attributes. You know, what are working well, what's not working well, what teams or parts of the organization do we feel like it's not really hitting the mark. And then our HR colleagues as well, kind of behind the scenes, are able to use this data to incorporate into management team meetings, et cetera. And I think something to note about, and I'm not saying particularly Peakon, but just any sort of survey tool that you use, and you're able to loop in questions about your values or your culture attributes. Usually managers have access to a dashboard. And so it really puts this information into the hands of the managers, because at the end of the day, it's about the teams on the ground and how they work together is where this will all come to life. So for them to have that data, I think is really powerful and really important. And it shouldn't just be sitting with the likes of myself in HR.
Terrific. Thanks, Allie. And so obviously there's the engagement survey, which you've now modified to map back to the cultural commitments. But using the Barrett cultural diagnostic tool allowed you to help LHH really identify what those cultural values and commitments needed to be.
Exactly. And I think something to that, Kristen, that we haven't really talked about yet is, and this was a huge debate, as you know, are you trying to create a new culture, or do you want to amplify the parts of the culture that you want to keep and that you really like? Because at the end of the day, I mean, you can define all day long, but a culture is what a culture is. So how do you shift it? And it's like a huge boat, a barge boat that is not easy to turn. So what parts of it are there that are really, really positive that you want to hold on to, and then try to be clear on the ones actually that you want to work to get rid of. So I think that's something where something like the Barrett survey, it can really get in pretty deep on what is your culture today, and where is it distinct? Where is it really powerful? So that you can then start to make that decision of what do you want to amplify and keep versus what are the things that you might want to leave in the past.
Yeah, it's particularly as you're looking to transform the business in this new organization structure. So that's great. Thanks, Allie. Nancy, we want to hear from you on the measurement and data conversation here. How do you leverage it? How does it support the work that you're doing around culture?
Right, lots of parallels with Ralph and Allie, and I personally love data. I think it is the secret weapon for HR to differentiate what we do and really help the organization with the health of having a healthy organization. So for us, and I think it is really important to have a people strategy. You may call it an HR strategy or a culture strategy, but I think it is really important to have a strategy. And I think there are a lot of times that people have programs and initiatives, or they have metrics, and they refer to all those things as a strategy. But the reality is, understanding your business longer term in terms of where's the business going, what is the business strategy, what's going on in the world around us, because we are not isolated, and having something that has the grit that will endure the test of time, because that truly becomes your North Star. And for us at OMERS, we had a fantastic business strategy when I joined 4 years ago, and the people component was hard to find. It was in fact in the operations. For me as an HR practitioner, it wasn't exciting to see people in a wheel in the operations, and no discredit, because the culture of people was there, but it was just how do we bring it to the forefront. So 4 years ago, we launched enterprise-wide. It was the first time for OMERS in Oxford that we had one strategy. And that came out of listening to our people to really understand what we could do to differentiate ourselves. We didn't have any HR data, like no HR system, no HR data. So we couldn't even tell you what our attrition or any of that was. So it was a big transformation. And we had to ensure that we had the strategy, and now we have a strategy that really looks at priorities, and within those priorities, we have initiatives that will differentiate us, and the priorities don't change. For us, it's 5 years. And then, so it's the what and the how we're going to do, and it's enterprise, so it's outside in versus just for HR. And then the plus one is there's a focus in HR, and it's really driving excellence through data. So it is important for us to have metrics of success, and those metrics of success are not the day to day, but that what you said, Kristen, is it's what's the foresight that we need. So not the hindsight of the past, but where do we want to be as an organization that truly differentiates us in these areas that are priorities. And by understanding, we have surveys as well. We have an employee experience that we launch annually. We take focus on the actions. We also have another pulse that we do annually with a different vendor that looks at our organization to assess if we are a great place to work. So it gives us validation. We benchmark it externally. But what I will say is what we're doing is we're really listening also and having listening sessions. And from that, there are 3 areas very much like yours, Ralph. We've heard from our employees, and we know through our data that the areas that have great weight on our engagement in terms of why people choose to come and stay at OMERS is it comes down to growth and development, comes down to a culture of inclusivity and wellness. And I'll narrow down on wellness because I think a few years ago, when we did our engagement survey, we added questions around wellness. There was no external benchmark or indice for us, but we said, you know what, in the midst of the pandemic, this is important for us to get some understanding for our people. And it's been very interesting because now our vendor is telling us, you know, what the index is. It's become a driver of engagement globally. And what we've done with the data, and not just the engagement data and the wellness index, but we also have the programs like we have, you know, various where people are using various benefits. So we have at an aggregate, we know drug usage and other trends that are happening. So understanding and sick leaves and other things. So under that, what it's led us to do is get more proactive, to see the foresight and put solutions in place for preventative measures around wellness, and having a view of wellness and a strategy that not only focuses on individual well-being, but organizational well-being. And in fact, how I'd like to describe it is we all are familiar with Maslow's theory, and since the pandemic, this pyramid has almost been turned upside down, and where, you know, having food and the basic necessities of shelter were the foundations, and then safety the next level, those things took such a key importance during the pandemic. Like if you remember, we were scrounging for toilet paper. My husband was buying beans. Like we still have beans from 4 years ago in our cabinet. And honestly, like those things took so much importance that we weren't thinking about self-actualization. So when you think of an organization and us in the business of people, because ultimately we're in the business of people, how do you listen to the organization to make your organization healthy? So our metrics are really about that. And if we can get predictive in our metrics, so in growth and development, we're not measuring just a participation of our programs. So we partner with LHH in those programs. We can see that those who attend certain programs have a greater likelihood to recommend us as an organization, greater likelihood to stay with us. And they're higher than those that do not. Or if they have development plans, they have a 10% point higher level of engagement. So then when we go to business leaders or individuals, we can drive our agenda because it's no longer the HR agenda. People see their own ownership and accountability. So it's not just the top of the house, but it's embodying that and enabling that level of ownership and empowerment all throughout. And in fact, for us, our employee value proposition is about empowering your impact. And it's really that your and our impact, because that's where we're going to have the most power in terms of differentiating ourselves.
Well, you're inspiring, Nancy. Absolutely. I love how you've been able to, it sounded like when you joined the organization, you were sort of missing some of those platforms and systems to give you the data, but now you have the data, and it's the way that you're starting to use the data in a more strategic and impactful way. And I also know our audience is always looking for, I'd say, really sort of tangible things that they can take and use and bring back to their teams or their organizations. So you mentioned listening sessions. What's a listening session at OMERS?
Sorry, I accidentally turned off my camera. I'm just too excited here.
You're good.
I think it is just, again, I joined during the pandemic, so April 2020, and it was how do we touch as many people as possible? So we didn't have an enterprise-wide engagement survey at the time, which we were building. And we were also wanting to reach out because there was so much going on globally, and there continues to be a lot going on. So myself and Blake Hutchison, who is our CEO here, we started smaller groups where we invited our employees through our employee resource groups, because they're the grassroots and really the backbone of our efforts, and they are a component of our culture in different regions. And we started to just go into these sessions and say, we want to listen. So it was very hard because we're often in positions that we're asked and we have to have answers, but we sat and we just listened. And we did many of these sessions. And from those sessions, we really heard. We listened to really hear and understand. And then, it was understanding how we can put the right solutions and actions in place. But those came from our people as well. We didn't come back and say, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. But again, what are you doing? So it was a more of a bottoms up approach, again, flipping that pyramid. And so we continue to do that. And it is really important. And it's not always about having solutions, because sometimes people just want to be heard. And we've discovered that as we evolved, myself and Blake we attended a listening session a couple weeks ago, and we walked out of the meeting and we were like, you know what, it was kind of like we felt good that we were doing the right things. And people were telling us more about the environment that they live in versus the organization. And they're feeling that sense of safety, inclusivity. We measure inclusivity, we measure psychological safety. So these are things that are important, but we also look at it by demographics, by regions, by generational differences. So again, the more data we have, the better we can understand these types of sessions before we go in, to really understand the diversity of our workforce. And again, I will just stress, it's really, really important not to feel that we always need a solution for everything we do in HR.
Yeah, and that's something that any size organization could take and implement, immediately. Even if you're a leader with a small team, just go and ask and listen. So I think that's a great takeaway for folks. So we're going to move on to the conversation around, we understand sort of what's happening in your organizations, what makes culture so important, how you're using data to measure. But what are the ways in which you've been able to activate either, the overall cultural commitments or the new values in the organization, or the ongoing values? All right. So Ralph, you talked about the 10-year journey. But Ali, I'd like to start with you on this one. What are some of the actions that you and LHH have been taking around this?
So first it was, how do we launch? And there was big debate as to how we were going to get this out into the organization. And timing wise, it worked really well because it coincided with our annual in-person Global Leaders Conference that we have every year, where all of our global leaders come together in person. And the fact that we were all in person made a big, big difference. So our president and I, we both kind of with great fanfare showcased each of our new cultural commitments. I'll actually share them because I think it's always interesting to hear what different organizations come up with. So for us, it was evolve with purpose, learn every day, reach high, own it, make it fun, and win together. And I think when we talk about activation, it's got to be something that really suits the organization. And we worked a lot on the actual wording and what's really going to hit the mark. So we feel it did. We got good reaction in that meeting. So not only did we launch it, but we also had a really interactive session, a group interactive session. It was really energizing. To help to bring those to life. Little sessions where the leaders could work together, talk about the cultural commitments, and we even had a drawing exercise. So people really had to think about, what does it mean for me? What does it mean for my team? What does it mean to the organization? Because if we don't have the leaders on board, as we all know, then you might as well just stop there. So we needed their commitment and buy-in, and also them to even experience and talk about it. So after that meeting, we then had a global town hall for all of our employees. And then we were able to, at that point, launch it to a wider organization. And again, we did that with great fanfare. Yes, it was just a webinar, but we made the point to put music and the story that sat behind it to make sure that we were we made a big deal. And then following that, we had a whole host of activities which started. But I think the important thing for us is that we had what we call culture ambassadors. So these were volunteers from the organization from across the globe who were a part of now a very special club, and we made sure they felt very, very special, and they were part of the journey from the very beginning. So it was really their responsibility to ensure that the culture commitments came to life in their respective areas. We wanted to really make it clear that this was not just an HR initiative, and I think Nancy mentioned that before as well. But we recognize that we have a role to play here, and part of that was to make sure that they have the tools to help this come to life. So we created a toolkit that included everything from posters to stickers to team backgrounds, and we also had an in the box workshop that they could help facilitate. So we wanted the culture commitments to be both visual as well as experiential. So you see it and you feel it. But at the end of the day, these ambassadors, they could get as creative as possible. So we really gave them a wide berth, a long rope, and said, do whatever you want. It's up to you. We want you to own this. This community still to this day meets once a month. They share best practices, stories, etc. Because I think that's really how it comes to life. We obviously included it in all of our subsequent global meetings, town halls, etc., and made sure that there were elements there. And now we are working to weave it through our various HR and talent processes, because obviously we want it to come to life there. And I would say that what we also had a lot of traction on, so if I think about best practices, it was the culture ambassadors, but we also had what we called our Culture Commitment Awards. And that's where we solicited nominations from across the organization, across the globe, where colleagues could nominate other colleagues or teams who have reflected or brought to life in a special way our culture commitments. And then we ultimately made a big splash of all those winners. So those are some ideas that we use here at LHH.
Just a few things there, Allie. I mean, definitely we heard in terms of the launch, you had, a very, what I would say, even, on the receiving end is a strategic communication plan, right? Mm-hmm. And so we're all the ways in which you can communicate this, help people see it, understand it, discuss it, creating those forums. But I love I think a good takeaway for the audience as well is the concept of culture ambassadors, right? So I think that's something that everyone could take away and work on as well.
Yeah, and one thing to that, Kristen, we even had a couple ambassadors that probably would not have chosen to be an ambassador, but we kind of nudged them. And these are the people who typically would be a bit, they're a bit cynical in the organization. They can be a detractor. You get those people on board and you won't have a problem at all. So we wanted to make sure these weren't just the people that were always the ones who were jumping up, volunteering for things, always the positive people. We also wanted those that we knew can be a little bit more tricky customers. And it's important that you make sure that they're included as a part of this journey as well.
Yeah, great point. And I think I know who some of those folks are. So Ralph, I want to go to you. I'd love to hear, ways in which you've seen Microsoft or even the role that you're in now. How are you continuing to activate it? What are some of the actions that you take? How does it come to life?
I think a key component is and was that in the end our CEO, let's say, spent the past years actually focusing on transforming the culture and transform it into, let's say, a learn it all culture, believing that in the end, this learn it all perspective and growth mindset is in the end leading, let's say, to better outcomes, better performance, and so on. And there were, let's say, three important components to that. For example, upskilling employees, creating space and also time to learn, and also, use data-driven insights to support employees overall. And how that actually, let's say, then came to life is when, as I mentioned before, generative AI actually popped up as a new technology. We actually saw that in the end, culture as a vehicle actually helped employees to adopt, let's say, this new technology in a very fast way to actually say, yes, we actually create the space and time to learn specifically, let's say, this new technology, to really understand what is the technology all about? How could it actually come into our products, and how can it actually change how we also work, let's say, as an employee? So how is it also, let's say, augmenting us in terms of how we work and how we do? And this is actually only possible if you have, let's say, the right culture enabling this, because yes, you can have, let's say, a certain communication campaign in place, you can have a certain upskilling program in place to say you want to bring in this new capability in organization, but it's culture who actually, let's say, brings it alive and actually enables this transformational process. So I think that was, let's say, just one example where we could really see how culture and how, when you actually activate culture the right way, it can actually help you bring and build, let's say, new capabilities into the organization, and let's say, yeah, really create momentum to make one step forward as an organization, really acting collectively, yeah, under, let's say, this cultural umbrella.
Well, and you touched on, with Gen AI just really coming to the forefront in the last couple of years, and obviously Microsoft is out in front on that. But I loved how you were able to link that to the cultural values, and that by having that as a commitment allowed you to move more quickly to really adapt that and leverage it in your business. It's a really amazing example.
Yeah.
Thank
because
you.
it's all about, let's say, the experimentation, giving people the room to really try out new things. And it's, let's say, the combination of culture and leadership, which really, let's say, enables that, to enable every employee to actually, let's say, absorb these new things, and not being afraid to do also something, testing something. And if it's not working, it's actually encouraging people to try again, because that's in the end a little bit the philosophy also of the growth mindset, which is, let's say, one of these important pillars of the overall culture.
Yeah, absolutely. Great examples here. So Nancy, I want to give you a chance. You've given us some of the examples throughout, but obviously I know you've been doing a lot of amazing work around your culture. So even in the beginning, you mentioned, bringing the values to life and then also embedding them into the organization. So we'd love to hear some of your examples.
Thank you. And I'll step back. I think it is really important when you're defining your values. We've all gone through those exercises, and often it is when there's a new CEO in place. I think in my one of my last experiences, I think I went through that exercise multiple times. And going through the exercise of defining your values, you can get creative, as we heard from you, Ali, in terms of engaging and understanding what matters to your people so you get it right. But in what I've learned over the years is there's some things that, as you look at values in different organizations, and I did this exercise, there's some common elements. We may label them differently, but you may have integrity, you may have humility, you may have excellence, but at the end of the day, it's how you bring it to life. And it's really important, again, because there are a lot of people who say, let me borrow your strategy, let me see your values. It has to mean something to you. So if you have a set of words or you have a statement, and if you take the label of your organization off, can you really test and say, yes, this is OMERS or this is LHH? It is really, really important to ensure that you are taking a step and saying this has to live in the organization. And I said end to end, and people are going to go, well, how do you do that? And I think, again, it's how do you bring it to life? And there are great things to do to kick it off, but how do you ensure it lives afterwards? And driving that level of ownership and empowering and metrics are really critical. And I think, again, you can anchor your values to a set of behaviors and measure against those when you hire. Some people do that. You could put it in your interview process. You can put it in your, we have it embedded in our talent playbook and our performance playbook, because those words start to have meaning for people in terms of when do we see it, or rewarding people in terms of recognition awards and letting people share their stories why they've been recognized against their values. So those values start to live and unify people and get reinforced. So again, it's not HR policing it, but it is really throughout the organization from a top down and a bottoms up approach. It starts to take a life of its own, and then it becomes contagious because then people are saying, I really get this. And it lives beyond, another leadership change, because the worst thing you can do to an organization is constantly change the values, because the people don't change. It's the values that change. And then your people are going to get whiplash because they're going to, my gosh, I've just, for the last decade of my life, I've been living this and I've come here because I believe in this purpose and set of values. And now, we have an entirely whole new set. What does that mean in terms of who, especially if you've done a really great job? If you don't do a great job, then they're going to go, okay, well, you know what? It's a flavor of the month and something else is going to come next month. So it doesn't really mean anything. It's just this group of HR people that are, rolling this out. So again, I've gone through it many times. We've been very successful. I have an amazing partner in our CEO who believes and lives the values and has helped and been an amazing partner. So again, that's critical. Our other enabling functions, like our communications team, have done an amazing job as well in terms of being creative, how to bring this alive. So it's just bringing all your different teammates together. But now I'm sensing, the ownership is happening in terms of the next journey is within our organization. So it's our job to integrate it. It's their job to really own it.
Well, great comments here. We are just about to the top of the hour. The time flew. We have a lot more questions, which we're not going to have a chance to get to today. But I did want to take just a minute and just wrap us up here. As I've been listening to the three of you, every time we have a conversation, we always learn something from these conversations, but sometimes it's just reinforcing some of the things that we already know. So I would say a couple of things that really stood out to me from the discussion today is, I think it is really important to think about the ownership around culture. I think a lot of times people think, oh, it's an HR initiative, but what we've heard clearly and we continue to hear is it really, it generally starts with the CEO really owning the ultimate business strategy and being the sponsor of it. And then HR is the strategic partner in helping to execute that. And then ultimately, it's about all of us really owning our culture and bringing that culture to life. We talked about measurement and data. Clearly, I think anyone in the business world today, we all need to lean into data in any role that we play. And so data plays a really important part in helping organizations, understand and continue to respond and iterate and build those healthy cultures and those positive cultures. I think the other thing that was a big standout to me, which is, and we've said it in the work that we do, which is it's not a one-time event, right? And Nancy, you just talked about that. We don't want it to be a flavor of the month. It's something that starts and it needs to kind of live and grow and evolve. And that takes time. So Microsoft is on almost a 10-year journey with their cultural transformation. So just lots of good insights, great conversation today. I can't say thank you enough to our guests. So Nancy, Ralph, and Allie, thank you so much for joining us. And also our team behind the scenes. So to Jackie and Kate, they have made this whole series possible. So we're concluding with our third session as part of this series, but there will be more sessions to come in the future on other topics as well. So I just want to say thank you to everyone for joining us. And as Kate said, there will be some follow-up information that will come to all of you for joining us today. So thanks, everyone, and have a wonderful day. Take care.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Bye-bye.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.